Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sydney's Spin on It, where I am breaking down everything Big Ten softball. I am so excited to be here with all of you. To give you a little bit of background on myself, I spent the last 4 years at Northwestern. I graduated in 2023, where I played softball for 4 years. Had so much fun, was fortunate enough to win the Big Ten overall conference 2 years in the tournament, 1 year, went to the World Series in 2022. But I bleed Big Ten. Being born and raised in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, growing up watching Wisconsin games and just all the Midwest games, I absolutely love this conference. I believe it has some of the grittiest players in college softball because let's face it, it is cold all the time. And if you grew up in the Midwest or in the Big Ten, even on the upper East Coast, you know what it's like to have to find abandoned warehouses or whatever gym floor or church basement that you could possibly practice in for months out of the year. And then your very first game of the year, you're on dirt for the first time in like 3 months after fielding a ball on the turf. So shout out to Big Ten girls. They are special and all the women who play in it. And I cannot wait to break it down because already in week one, we had some crazy ranked wins that we're going to talk about. But I want to break us down, starting with the teams who are returning the most players. Now, there is two teams in this Big Ten conference. You have Indiana University, who is returning 90% of their lineup, along with Ohio State. So we are going to start off with the Hoosiers because they snuck their way into top 25 in all rankings, NCAA, our very own Softball America, and others around anywhere from 21 to 24, but really it was because of this week one performance. And they were a very young team last year, but somehow, they just got better throughout the season and they ended up making it to the Big Ten championship game tournament. And I really believe, even though they might not have won it, playing on those big stages in those big moments fueled them in this offseason because they knew they were right there from winning how many championships and in getting themselves an even higher seed in the tournament. And they have already shown now here in the beginning of this 2024 season that they know what it takes to now win those big games. And we saw it in their very first game this year against Oregon. They came out firing in all cylinders. They took down and were the first ranked win for the Big Ten of the season. But let's talk about a few of their players because their ace, Brianna Copeland, I've hit against her myself. She is very talented. She racked up 22 wins last season and started off hot in week one, receiving NFCA Leadoff Classic, all tournament team accolades. And you can't forget that this team also lost a key piece from last season. Big Ten Player of the Year and Freshman of the Year, Taryn Kern, who now transferred to Stanford, but they still have anchors in their lineup. Specifically in the 3 spot is Minnick, who hit over 400 last season and is holding it down already for them in the 3 hole. But this is a very exciting team, a team that's on a lot of people's radar as they're starting to predict them to be favorites in the Big Ten. But once we start talking about these teams, you're going to understand that this conference is so special this year because it truly is up for the grabs amongst so many different teams. Let's go into Ohio State, who is also returning 90% of their starting lineup from last season. Now, they went 4-1 on the weekend and was the 2024 Fieldsburg Invitational champions. And in 5 games, Ohio State finished with a team average of 406. That is absolutely insane. And they had a 466 on base percentage. Hannah Church, only a sophomore from Tampa, played in 4 or 5 games and finished the weekend with a 600 average, 9 hits in 4 games, and driving in 8 runs. So right away, this team is making a statement that their bats are hot, which, to be honest, opening weekend is such a trial run for a lot of these teams. Because if you look at it, these last how many months, the only the only pitchers that you have been facing are the ones on your very own team. So shout out to this pitching staff at Ohio State for getting their batters ready because as soon as they saw a few other aces, they were ready to dominate. They were on time. They showed their power. So I'm excited to see where it can take them. And one other note that I want to mention is they hit 434 with runners in scoring position with 2 outs. I mean, that is an insane stat. And it just shows you that with 2 outs, anything that can happen. And this team has a lot of belief in their team. And on the other side, they only opponents against their pitching staff with 2 outs hit 147. So their pitching staff was understood the importance of how many runs they were getting on 2 outs. And they tried to really emphasize that when they had 2 outs, they wanted to lock down defense because they didn't want to give other teams an opportunity to do what they were doing to their opponents. But now we have 3 teams who are returning 7 starters from their lineup last season. You have Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. We are going to start with the Badgers because their opening weekend is maybe one of their best in these last 4 or 5 years under Coach Healy. They went 4-1. They beat their ASU game was actually postponed, and their only loss on the weekend came to Grand Canyon. But they had players such as Brooke Kuffel, who is hitting .727 with 4 home runs and is 4 for 4 on the season. I mean, absolutely ridiculous numbers. And as a team, they had 8 team home runs. Gabby Salo, who is their ace, started off with being 2-0 on the season. And in 10 innings pitched, she had 16 Ks. And then for Tessa, their other ace pitcher, in 12 innings pitched, she had a 0.00 ERA, throwing some absolute nasty stuff. They're a great complement of each other, one bringing more speed, one bringing more spin, and just bringing different parts of the zone, one more up, one more down. So this is really a tough matchup when you're facing them as hitters to have such different looks on their lineups, and it proved to be very successful for them in week 1. This team also has 4 grad seniors. That is some of the highest out of any of the teams in the Big Ten. So they're really leaning on their grad seniors to be their leaders for this team. And you can see their leadership step up already in week 1. And they're one of the many Big Ten teams that is headed to Clearwater Invitational, which I will actually be there as well. I cannot wait because these matchups are going to be ridiculous. But for Wisconsin specifically, they're going to open up against number 6 Georgia, Kentucky, Oklahoma State, University of Central Florida, who is the only unranked team, but they are right on the cusp of it, and Washington. So right there, they have, doing some quick math, 4 ranked opponents. So that is a lot of opportunity for them to show how they match up really against the best of the best, which for the Big Ten specifically, these first 4 or 5 weekends when they're facing ranked opponents weekend in, weekend out, this is really the games that matter the most for when it comes to that NCAA tournament time, because especially this Big Ten conference, that I think there aren't going to be as many sweeps, but a lot of splitting and 2-1 and matchups on the series. These ranked wins are going to be so crucial to your RPI and hopefully setting yourself up to make it to the NCAA playoffs. And for those few teams who want to host and believe they have the potential to host, they need to come away from this weekend with 2 or more ranked wins. But now, heading off to another team that is led by grad seniors is Minnesota Gophers. And they had a very, very tough week 1, really just matchups. They went 3-2, their only losses being to Stanford, who was ranked 3 at the time. They did have a ranked win against 24 San Diego State, and their other one was to another ranked loss. So for them, they saw great competition right off the bat. Every single one of their games was very close. They saw, one of the best pitchers right now currently in the country, Nigeri Kennedy. So for this team, you have to look at week 1 as a blessing, a huge learning experience. You figured out how you compare to the best of the best, and now how quickly can they make those adjustments and really focus on their work this week in practice to now go and have an opportunity where they are also facing a ranked Washington, Georgia Tech, a ranked Georgia, and LSU, to show how you learn from week 1 and can now go apply it and walk away with even more ranked wins. But for them too, they had 4 players hitting over 333 averages, including grad senior Sydney Supple, who has held it down for them at second base the last how many years. And Sydney Schwartz went 1-2, but you could tell, even though she has 2 losses, she is the pitcher they want on the mound and that they believe in against these ranked opponents. So she is someone who is only going to get better with time, and her record's going to improve with more games. And a new face for them with Bree Enter went 2-0 on the season. And then we go on to Iowa, who is actually hosting the Big Ten tournament this season. Very fun environment to play in. They have a stadium that a lot of Midwest girls grew up playing tournaments around, how they have their one home stadium and they have multiple practice fields behind them. So Midwest girls are very familiar with this area. And they also started off 3-2 this opening weekend. They took a win away from a Power 5 opponent in NC State, but they dropped 2 games, one to Notre Dame, 5-4. That was a nail biter back and forth. And the other was against, at the time, 13 Utah, and they lost 3-1. So for this team, they were right there in games, and specifically looking at their numbers, they had hitters that were in scoring position. So you have to look at 2 programs, Notre Dame and Utah, who are programs that are phenomenally coached and just led by their coaching staff. You are right there with them. So for this Iowa team, I hope it only fires them up to understand you were getting base runners on. You were holding these, top-notch lineups that now, if you can just focus on finding a way to get those runners in scoring position to score and cutting down on a few little things, walks, hit by pitches, those could all be the key difference makers and now help you win games like that, because they are right there. And they had 3 pitchers on staff who threw throughout the entire weekend, and every single one of the 3 of them had sub-2 ERAs. So they are in very, very good position moving forward. With a few adjustments, can really be a threat against a lot of the top teams in the Big Ten and in the country. And then once again, 3 teams are tied, this time for returning 6 starters from last season. That is Maryland, Rutgers, and Purdue. And I want to talk about this Purdue team because I am absolutely thrilled with the new coaching staff that they have, led by Coach Megali Frazziotti. And she served as an assistant coach for the Boilermakers the last 2 years. But under her tenure, the Purdue defense has accumulated 2,096 putouts, 910 assists, and 27 double plays in just her 2 seasons alone. That's one of the best showings in the Big Ten and one of the greatest to ever do in the Big Ten. Coach Carol Hutch quoted that she believes that Megali is a player's coach and a tremendous human being, and the sky is truly the limit with her and any team that she coaches. And that is incredible praise from Carol Hutchins, one of the best to ever coach in the game, one of the most winningest all-time coaches between her and Coach Condrea. And Coach Megali, she has been someone who has made such a difference in this sport, not only at a college level, she's just starting to tap in there, but really from the international level as well. She played for the Argentina national team for 13 years, where she was team captain and served in the 2015 World Cup and 4 Pan American Championship games. But she has also created a platform to connect the softball community in Latin America with resources in the U.S. and across the entire world to educate, empower, and prepare softball players throughout Latin America to become a better version of themselves on and off the field. And I just think that is so beautiful. And the work that she has done has been tremendous over, in different parts of our world. And now to be able to do that here in Purdue is just unbelievable. And I think you're already seeing that in culture change in talking to the rest of their staff and players. The culture is different. The buy-in is different from these players. So they went 3-2. They lost twice to a number 6 ranked Georgia. But this team is really, I think, a team that you're going to see just get better throughout the season as more players just keep joining in on this culture that she is cultivating there. And another person on their staff that I have to shout out, one of my former catchers, Jordan Rudd from Northwestern. She brings a ton of experience being a Gold Glove winner, how many time All-American at Northwestern. So they have a lot of good things coming their way there in Purdue. But then going on to Rutgers, who have also been trending upwards these past few seasons, they returned their top 4 hitters in the lineup and Ace and Engel in the circle. They went 4-1 on the weekend, scoring 43 runs in 5 games. That is something else. And they had innings from 4 pitchers. So this team is truly trying to develop a staff mentality. You're going to see them in a lot of games have a lot of split games. They're not going to go, a long duration with one specific pitcher. They believe their best way to win is if they continue to switch up their pitching staff and keep the other lineup continually guessing, because they know they have the hitters to compete with anyone. So I think within the pitching and the defense, when they can lock that down, this team is going to be a threat. And they're headed on the road to the Panther Invitational. They'll face Army, a ranked Duke, and FIU in 2 other games that are still waiting to be determined. And now we're going to head east to Maryland, and they had a very tough opening weekend as well. They went 2-3, and their losses was to number 3 at the time, UCLA, 6-5. And let's talk about this loss for a second, because this was a really hard one. Maryland came out at the gates in the first inning. They put up 4 runs against UCLA, and then unfortunately they were only able to add on 1 other run, and they gave up 6 to eventually lead them to losing. But for them, this, I feel like, should only be, again, another confidence booster for this Maryland team, that you can put up, 4 runs in the first inning against a UCLA team. No team or opponent, no matter what's across their chest, should scare you. That's the biggest thing. I think this team is just gaining confidence with every year they're in the Big Ten, with every year they compete against the best of the best. And next weekend, they head to the Lion Classic in LA, where they'll face Southeast Missouri, Syracuse 2 times, 2 great matchups against a Power 5 opponent, Southeastern Louisiana, and Southeast Missouri once again. And to Michigan and Northwestern, who returned 5 starters. Michigan, they went 4-1 on the weekend. They lost to UCF, but then they went and they turned around and they beat number 17 Florida in 10 innings. It was an incredible game. The atmosphere of the stadium there in Florida, it looked like a postseason game, which is just so exciting, and it speaks tremendous volumes to where the sport of softball is growing. And if they can put up numbers like that and pack a house in week 1, I can't wait to see what they'll continue to do once they go into conference and then postseason play. But that was a huge game, and I want to specifically break down that game even more, because Lauren Durkowski, who has absolutely filthy pitches, her changeup, her off speed, and the way, her rise ball floats, she is such a mastermind on the mound. And we really started to see her develop into her own last year in Big Ten play. But she has just come out so strong, so filthy, and even more accurate in her pitches and where she is placing the ball. But she's a pitcher who is not concerned about strikeouts. They beat this Florida team in 10 innings with her only having 4 strikeouts. I mean, that goes to show that as a pitcher, to be dominant doesn't just mean getting the strikeouts. Sometimes it means throwing those off-speed pitches, causing a weak ground ball or an off-timed shallow pop-up. And she did both of those multiple times over and over against Florida that can have you walk away with a big-time win. So shout out to her in that lockdown defense, because it takes a team to pull off a win like that with 4 strikeouts. And they also ended off their weekend with a win against Oregon State. So right away, this Michigan team is proving that they want to be one of the big dogs in the Big Ten and in the country. And this next weekend, they will face Seton Hall, Maine, Louisville, Florida Atlantic in Maine for the 2nd time. And then on to the former Big Ten champions, the Northwestern Wildcats. They also returned 5 starters, and 4 out of the 5 received all Big Ten honorees. 2 of them being freshmen, all Big Ten players who have already both stepped up big time. Kansas Robinson had 2 home runs in opening weekend, and Kelsey Nader is now the leadoff for the Northwestern Wildcats. She went from playing in right field to now learning a new position at first base and showing that she was just locked down on defense. But overall, this team walked away with a big win against ASU after dropping their opening game. And they really only got better and better as the weekend went on. That win against ASU really proved to be the turning point, and their bats came alive. They had 6 home runs throughout the weekend. Angela Zedak being the sole graduate senior who has been with this team throughout all 5 of her years, hitting over 600 already in opening weekend. Ashley Miller, who is the Michigan State, she was their ace for them for 3 years, now in her last year of eligibility, transferred over to Northwestern, where technically she is in her graduate schooling, but in her senior year of playing. And in her 9 innings pitched for the Wildcats in opening weekend, she is a 0.00 ERA, absolutely filthy pitches as well. Her drop ball is something that ASU really struggled against. And that was really her bread and butter at Michigan State. And just throughout this offseason, it is only looking even nastier in the work she has done with Northwestern, as she looked very, very comfortable in purple this weekend. And then not only that, but this Northwestern Wildcat team, they started 6 first-year players, something they haven't done since 2019. And if you can remember the class they did it with, who recently graduated as fifth-year seniors, they turned out to be pretty talented, bringing this program to new heights that they hadn't been to since 06, 07. So there is a lot of excitement around this freshman class, not only for this season, but in years to come. They had in the 6 first-year starters, 2 had home runs, one being their starting catcher, one being their starting pitcher, and 2 freshman pitchers had complete game wins. So a lot of excitement for them within the young players that they have brought out. And also having a top 10 play of the week, Ayanna Lindsay, a player who had really came in and filled so many different holes for them in her first 2 years, and now in her junior year, finally gets a moment to be a starter in weekend one and has just absolutely shined. She is someone who I know personally put in so much silent work when nobody was looking, one of the greatest teammates you could ever ask for. So she is someone who the game is definitely delivering back after all she's poured into it the last 2 seasons. And to round us off, our 2 teams with 4 returning players are Illinois and Penn State. And for Illinois, they had a tough weekend. They had 2 games canceled against their ranked opponent. They would have played Auburn twice, but they lost their 3 games they did play, including another ranked opponent in Virginia Tech that they faced. Now, this team has a lot of new faces, not necessarily all first years, but within sophomores and juniors who hadn't played a ton in the past, who are being, put into bigger roles. And these women are only going to learn. It is opening weekend. They learned a bunch. They gained a ton of experience. So expect to see them start to chip away as they get their feet under them and, put away with some more wins. And they'll have the opportunity to do so in the spring games in Leesburg, Florida this weekend. And then to Penn State, who, man, did they put themselves on a national recognition this weekend. They are off to a 5-0 start, the best in the Big Ten, and they had their first win over a nationally ranked opponent since 2021. And how did they do it? By pitching by a committee, where they beat number 16 Arkansas, and they had 3 pitchers pitch. The first one went 3.2 innings. The second one went 2.1 innings. And then the last one being freshman Bridget Nemeth. She went 2 innings to close him out and is now on a 4-0 start on the weekend. And she received all Big Ten honors right away in her opening weekend of college softball in her career. And this team I cannot praise enough, because they're also another team who has, I feel like, had certain pieces these past years to be a real competitive team. But this year they're putting it all together. And I really believe it starts with the chemistry. When you saw their celebration against Arkansas after they took down that ranked opponent, it was every single woman running out of the dugout, hugging each other. And those relationships are work that has been done off the field these last how many months that are really shining for them already in week one. And they have a lot of excitement against their freshman ace that they have brought in, and just their entire team, who is really coming from not a lot of experience, but a lot of heart and a lot of grit. And that is going to propel them to new heights, I think, than this program has ever reached. And then we have to talk about Nebraska, specifically save them for last, where they're returning a numerous lineup full of countless of all Big Ten honorees, but they have been the team that was talked about the most in Big Ten, surrounding the hype of bringing in Jordy Bahl, who is a national champion for the Oklahoma Sooners last season, where she was named the MVP of the Women's College World Series and had a terrific incident in game one against Washington, an opening weekend in Mexico this past weekend. It was in the second inning of her very first game for Nebraska that you saw her step and plant and slip. And right away, you could tell just that look on her face that something wasn't right. And it truly is so heartbreaking for Jordy Bahl, but really for this Nebraska team and the entire college softball atmosphere. And the reason why I say it is because Bahl is such a player, such a special player, not only for the way that she is on the field and how talented she is, but just the hype that she brings to this game. She has so many eyes on her, and she has done nothing but handle the spotlight with absolute grace, always bringing love back to her team, to her program, now to her home state in Nebraska, and her faith. She is so poised. And when she came out and announced to the entire softball world, first of all, it was a notification on ESPN, which just speaks to how much the growth of the game of softball is having, that ESPN is sending alert that a college softball pitcher is out for the season. And that just shows the new volumes and heights she has allowed softball to reach. So truly a sad moment in college softball. But I know here at Softball America, myself personally and this entire team is excited to follow and to tell her story of her comeback, because we all know it's going to be a great one. And also, you cannot count out this Nebraska team. They have so many pieces beyond Jordy Bahl that returned from last season, where they were an incredibly talented team, finishing the top third of the Big Ten. We're a huge competitor against anyone in the country. They will continue to do so as well without her, but she will still be a key player for them. I know she will do a ton of work, as much as she can on the sideline and in the dugout for her team. But that was a ton of information. So I'm going to wrap it all up. That overall, the Big Ten this weekend had 4 ranked wins, and they will have an opportunity to have 11 more this weekend coming up. Northwestern has 3 opportunities. Wisconsin and Nebraska has 4, along with countless of other opportunities for big time wins from the other Big Ten teams. The teams who walked away with Big Ten awards in week 1 was Rutgers. They walked away with the player of the week, and Katie Wingert, who hit 444 with 4 home runs, moving herself into second all-time in Rutgers program history in home runs, and moves up to 5th all-time in program history with 115 RBIs. And then pitcher Penn State was Bridget Nemeth, who we talked about earlier. She earned a victory as Penn State's pitcher in 4 out of 5 games, recording a save in the 5th game, and logged a 1.09 ERA in her very first collegiate 19.1 innings, helping him get that big time win against Arkansas. And then freshman was Ohio State Jasmine Burns, who hit 412 with 3 home runs and 9 RBIs, including a grand slam. But that will be all we have for this week's Sydney Spin on It with Big Ten. Stay tuned, as I will keep you updated with every single week what's going on in the Big Ten, breaking down how each team are doing. And join next week as we will start to bring on special guests from Big Ten players themselves to find out a little bit more about what's going on in their program and get a little behind the scenes look at to what it's like to be a Big Ten softball player. Signing off for now, I'm Sydney Supple.